Welcome and welcome to your life. You're fundraising in a political season, and I'm so sorry for you and for me and for all of us. We had a lot of questions about this at Turnkey, and I learned on a group call recently that there was someone at Classy who had experience and has data. And to be frank, some of that data is really good news. So today with us, we have Shanna Birky from Classy, and Shanna is the VP of Customer Experience. We also have Dr. Otis Fulton, who is also my husband, so we will be inappropriate. Dr. Fulton is, I only call him that on calls. I don't call him that at home, just so you know. He's a VP of Psychological Strategy at Turnkey, and he's going to be helping us with messaging and the psychological condition of some of our constituents. So with that, let's get started. Shana, let's lead with the good news. Tell us about the last 9 of 10 presidential elections and what they did to our community.
Yeah, this conversation is so important because there are so many questions regarding, what's going to happen. And I love that we're pairing it with the psychological side, the messaging side, because really that is the true form of the conversation, as it should be, is kind of seeing what's the data saying and then how we respond to it. So the data has actually shown us over the last 9 of 10 elections, we take out one election due to a global financial crisis, that fundraising has actually gone up. So it continues to actually go up. We're currently seeing that on our own platform as well, that it's following typical trends. And so election years don't cause fundraising to come crumbling down. The assumption that a lot of people have is that okay, my bigger donors are going to donate to elections. They're going to put money in different places. That does happen sometimes, but for the most part, we are seeing that donors continue to give, and they're happy to continue to give and be a part of your cause. But it's not, I think it's a really big myth out there that all of a sudden you have to plan for kind of a downward trend to your fundraising practices or your fundraising dollars raised during an election year. That's just simply not what the data shows us.
Why do you think that is?
We have a few assumptions on why we think that it continues to move forward. One, donors during this time are looking for causes to continue to be a part of. And so we're seeing that currently happen today, where, we're not seeing recurring donors drop by any means. So your supporter is still a supporter even during this time, even when you might think that they're competing for a dollar on the election side versus your organization. We also see something called rage giving, and we do believe that actually helps to even out a potential curve. So what rage giving is simply a reaction to potentially, a political issue that might be having, and somebody actually going and fundraising the opposite. And so we do see rage giving come in after an election. We also have seen it come in after debates for certain topics that are happening, or really lively topics happening. You do see fundraising in certain areas kind of spike a little bit due to this rage type of giving. We will see the highest spike after the actual election. But people are hungry at that point to join a cause. They're hungry for that an environment and a community that they can connect with because of what happened in that election. So we have a few assumptions that we think are the reasons why we continue to see this trend. But again, they're a little bit of assumptions. You don't have to edit that one out, but they are assumptions.
All right, very good. I'm going to jump straight to rage giving, if that's all right, Otis. What is rage giving from a human psychology perspective?
Yeah, I think of rage giving as an impulse buy. We know that in general, giving is motivated by emotions. And rage giving is when this emotional state gets very highly amped up, and people really want to do something to diminish or release or somehow resolve this emotional state. And depending on the individual, how long does it last? It could last from a period of a few days to a few weeks. So nonprofits have, that much time. You got to act quick, or if it's going to be a one-time, they're going to be the classic one-time donor, no matter what their motivation was. And we know that most people are one-time donors. But in order to get them to be a repeat donor, you have to act quickly. You have to thank them quickly. You have to get them more engaged quickly, and so forth. This is one of the times that you want to tell them how much money has been raised from similar people like themselves, so that they know that, which is something that is going to validate their emotional state and so forth, and make them more likely to give more. So that in a nutshell is what rage giving is all about.
Interesting. So a comparable behavior would be, for example, the Women's March. It just blew up and it was validation, not donation, but it was a behavioral element that was both validation and consolidation, I guess, coming together and engagement. Is that a good comparable?
Let me just give you a personal example. I gave to an organization. It was a very small organization, and I was one of many, many people that suddenly donated to this group. This group got, I think, $40 million within about a week's time, which is more than they had raised in their entire history of 25 years. Okay. And they were very upfront with all of the donors, myself being one, of course. They were very humble about it. They expressed gratitude and humility at the same time. And it just made it very, very attractive to want to donate even more money to them, even though they said, gosh, we've got more money than we know what to do with right now. Thank you. It just made them all the more attractive. And they got a lot of repeat donors.
Got it. So let's say I have more questions about rage giving, but I want to save them. We're in season. It's before the election. We know rage giving is going to amp after the election. I'm competing with candidates, noise. I'm competing with 501c4s, which are political nonprofits. Donations are not tax deductible. How do I differentiate myself? How do I make sure I don't trip up and mess up in terms of my messaging? Do I stay nonpartisan, or if the issue is really aligned with a particular candidate, do I become more partisan while still maintaining legal boundaries between 501c3s and 501c4s? Otis, thoughts?
Well, I think that all depends on your mission.
Mhm.
If your mission is one in which, you've got a tribe that is highly, highly affiliated with one political party or another, then you're better off affiliating yourself with that more closely. If you've got, if you've got a group of folks that it's more bipartisan, then you want to do the exact opposite. Then you want to avoid becoming partisan in that regard and affiliating your mission with a particular political group.
Shannon said something earlier about donors are looking to be part of something. Do you think, is there any way that this crazy environment could help a nonprofit, help a donor become part of something? Is there any wave to ride here?
Shayna's theories about how this all works is supported by psychology. Let me take a minute to explain. Back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I guess into the 90s, there's an American psychologist named George Gerbner. He was at the University of Pennsylvania. He was the dean of the Annenberg School of Communication, which you may have heard of. And he had a great quote. He said, "You can't tell people what to think, but only remind them what to think about." And basically what he was talking about is this. Things that are in the media, they don't necessarily tell people what to think about an issue, but they tell them that the issue is important. Okay. And I think that that's why Shayna sees that, giving continues to be strong, because let's say an issue like the environment, or immigration. We hear so much about that now. It validates that people who are concerned with that issue, it validates their belief that, yes, this is something that's really important. And, in a sense, every time they hear about this in media through politics and so forth, political reporting, it's kind of priming them to want to do more because it's saying, yes, what you believe to be important, it really is important. So, it's not necessarily telling them what to think, but it's telling them what to think about. And so I think that's a lot of the reason behind why giving continues to be strong in a political season because it's this very affirming message. Yes, these are important things for people to be involved in.
Shana, back to you. Do you think this political season is different from others? If so, how and why?
So specific to kind of how we're thinking about fundraising, I don't think that it's drastically different, to be honest. The polarizing topics are still going to be, similar to the ones that we've seen in previous elections. Do I think that there's a lot more noise in the media? Yes, absolutely. Do I think that nonprofits will probably have to compete a little bit more than we've seen in previous elections? Potentially. But overall, the reason, and going back to kind of the assumptions that we have, and really what Otis was talking about was based in community, that still exists. That need is still there. And that is the need that the nonprofit is fulfilling, right? Is this community during a time that is so polarizing. And so I do think this, the ability to attract new donors, and potentially we might even see more rage giving due to the political environment that we are in. So you might see one-time donors go up. An interesting point on the rage giving is, those are typically your smaller donors, your $5 to $10 donors, but they are primed to become recurring or sustainer donors. So, or sustainers. And so, to me, as I think about the grand scheme of things, yes, this is a very interesting election year at all angles. Do I think it will, the uniqueness of it, do I think it will ultimately impact nonprofits to the point where we no longer will stay on the trend that we were seeing, election over election? I don't necessarily think so. The topics that are polarizing still exist. The community is needed. And ultimately, I do think donors will turn to that sort of community to feel that sense of belonging. So I don't see it that way. But that could be a hot take, depending on who you talk to.
So I'm curious, one way to express one's political beliefs is through donation, not just to candidates, but to nonprofits. Otis, I'm going to ask you the question I always ask you, which I don't prepare you for in any way, shape, or form. So here you go. Do you think the fact that an organization might let me demonstrate my political stance, but also give me a tax deduction is meaningful? Because the 501c4 doesn't allow me to deduct my donation. The 501c3 that demonstrates my political affiliation would let me deduct my donation.
I think that is a very small factor in giving in this regard. I think that, if I can restate what you guys were talking about in psychological terms, what people are talking about is they're making this small donation that affirms their identity, that I'm the kind of person who believes that this or that. And I think that, when these kinds of motivations are in play, then things like tax exempt status and tax deductions and so forth really are very small factors.
Okay, very good. I want to talk about pre-election messaging from a nonprofit. In terms of copywriting, let's go to that. How do you advise a client on staying out of the weeds with their copy on both on their website and their email or social posting? Otis, what would you say to them?
Well, it's just good practice at any time. It's mission, mission, mission. Organizations believe that they need to talk more about themselves to people than they really do. Folks are terribly disinterested, unfortunately, for many nonprofits, they're really disinterested in the nonprofit itself. What they're interested is in how well they fulfill the mission. And what can the nonprofit do for me to so that I can feed kids who are hungry, or I can save animals who are freezing, or I can, provide people with homes who are out on the street. So these are the kinds of things that nonprofits need to talk about, just like any other time of the year.
Okay, very good. Um, Shana, does political fundraising activity in the broader environment affect donor behavior for non-political nonprofits? Not just in donation amounts, but do you have any data or sense that they're more and less engaged with the nonprofit generally when the season is so noisy?
There is, and I think you're specifically talking to kind of the grabbing for attention, right?
Mhm.
And it's interesting. I was talking to a food bank about this topic, and it's very different talking to a food bank versus a reproductive rights organization, right? The food bank isn't necessarily going to be so polarizing for a lot of people. And so the food bank is very concerned based off of what has happened to them in the past, where a lot of their major donors, very high net worth donors, just basically came to them at the beginning of the year. So if I back up a little bit, they had a really great strategy at the beginning of the year. They had a strategy around focus that was focused on talking with their typical high net worth donors, even if they came in towards the end of the year, they're talking to them now. And the conversation was about, it's okay, but do you plan to give during this election year, basically to inform their organization, should we expect half of what we typically get from this repeat high net worth? And what they found is it was true. It held true. About, a quarter of the donation volume that they got from these high net worth donors, they were willing to tell the nonprofit, yes, I am going to be giving in this election year. Yes, my donation this time will probably be a little bit smaller. So, I think that strategy as far as segmentation, where you're looking at high net worth donors and then you're looking at potentially one-time donors or recurring donors, you will be vying for their attention. That's just fact, because there is so much noise. But I do think, at the heart of what's happening, people still want to feel connected. They still want to feel part of that community. And so, yes, there is a ton of noise. I think based off your segments and who you're looking at within your donor base, you're going to have different responses and you're going to have to vie for attention in different ways. I think that answers your question, but kind of takes it in a little different way, as in the way I've had so many of these conversations with our larger nonprofits, and the segmentation piece, I was not expecting to come up as much, but it has come up a ton. This is their strategy for addressing this type of donor versus this one versus that one. You also see this when they're putting kind of like reactionary campaigns up. What do those look like? And again, it all kind of goes back to having really thoughtful strategy around how do we actually, either the existing donor or a new donor, how do we address them?
I had an interesting question from someone in the Turnkey online community, Amy Ganderson with Colorectal Cancer Alliance. She asked, will we see a decline in PSA placements, less donated space? That seems to speak to the noise question, like, will our ability to be noisy be restricted? Do you have any insight on that? I do not.
I don't, but I can make a safe assumption where, we do know advertising spend is going to go up. And so naturally, if you see that go up, I think any sort of competition will also arise out of that as well. We do have some nonprofits that have come back to us and said, we're not spending any money in the way that we used to this specific year because advertising dollars are just too expensive. So their strategies are very different this year. more grassroots versus maybe the amount of, amount of advertisements you actually would see on TV. There is one nonprofit in particular I was talking with, they do have a TV advertisement strategy, social media strategy, basically they have 4 or 5 different ways that they advertise. They decided to back away from 2 of them, which was on radio as well as on TV because it was just on media because it was just too expensive for them at the time. So they took that money and used it elsewhere. But I don't have, outside of the feedback that I'm getting from nonprofits when we go into kind of this sort of detail, we know it's more expensive right now. And we do know that some nonprofits are dramatically changing strategy in order to address the cost to advertise.
Would you guess that of the 9 of 10 presidential elections you referenced earlier, where giving went up instead of down, do you think that same dynamic happened every time? Is there any reason it wouldn't have happened that way?
It does. We know historically advertisement, the cost goes up in election year, especially when you look to the later half of the year. So October, November timeframe.
Yeah.
Something we caution our nonprofits a lot is, okay, let's talk about what's happening in October for your organization, right? Because there's so much noise then. Are you launching new programs? Okay, how are you launching? What's the goal? We might want to manipulate the goal a little bit to make sure that this fundraising goal can actually be achieved, but you are competing in the noisiest time. And I do think it's going to be even more elevated this year than we've ever seen in the past.
Nonprofit giving, that is.
Yeah.
If I could kind of share a quick anecdote, we tend in the nonprofit world to think that political campaigns are sophisticated fundraising engines and so on and so forth. We shouldn't think that. We shouldn't think that. And the reason I say that is, it was 9 years ago now. Katrina and I met someone who was the head of digital fundraising for a national presidential candidate, and someone whose name you would recognize quickly. And he told us we were talking about something that Shanna brought up, and that's community. And this gentleman said, let me explain how we do it in the political world. We get a list and we hammer it for 3 or 4 months. We ask for donations every single time. And then on election day, we throw the list away. And then a year later, we start all over. And so what nonprofits do that campaigns care nothing about is creating community. So throughout this noisy environment and so forth, it would be my recommendation to really emphasize that you're part of our community, because I can tell you that political campaigns really don't do it very well, if they do it at all. And so that's something that is going to sustain.
The cultivation that nonprofits do is best in class. So many industries can learn from really good donor cultivation strategies. And thankfully, we haven't seen some of the political campaigns take on that. But I do, I think to speak a little bit more to what Otis was saying, the nonprofit community is really good at this. They are really good at communicating over time, communicating the story, how you relate, how the why behind it, the impact that they're making, so that there is continued connection, there is that continued community. But that cultivation strategy, we kind of go back to those small one-time gifts that you might get because of the rage giving. That has to be a part of your strategy. That has to be baked into how you're thinking about things, because it is, if they're throwing the list away, in some cases it's probably appreciated, even if you did donate at one time. But, I think the nonprofits, who are listening, don't stop that. That's so important, especially at this time, because the dollars you were competing against are not doing that same strategy. And so, keeping that in mind, I think is critical.
It's interesting to me that your data says that giving goes up during presidential election seasons, and yet we change our behaviors?
So what we've seen with the majority of our clients, I can't speak to everyone, but a lot of our clients is that they do continue to
Mhm.
fundraise and communicate and engage with their donor base in the same way. You're not seeing drastic change. The changes that they're making are more so due to timing. And so they're still having their annual gala. They're still going through, their run walk in spring, those sorts of things. Those aren't changing. It's more so the timing. I think that also contributes to, okay, we're going to keep going with this strategy. It's not, we're going to dramatically change it, but timing might play a factor. But I do think that ultimately does contribute to why we continue to see the upward trend that we are seeing.
So Shanna, you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry. What happened after the debate, for example? Did you see anything interesting happen there?
So my assumption, honestly, given the debate, was to actually see this crazy spike out of rage giving or those sorts of things. We didn't actually see that on our platform, which to me was surprising. I did have a few conversations with some more right-leaning organizations who, were expecting also to see a spike in donations and actually saw the opposite. Now it might be due to kind of the causes they're affiliated with and those not being spoke of on the actual debate stage. But again, it kind of goes back to the status quo thing that we see in the data. But was hoping that potentially because of the debate something different would happen, and that just simply wasn't the case for our platform.
Interesting. What about when Harris was replaced Biden? Did you see anything then?
So we do know that other platforms saw huge spikes. They were specifically organizations that cater to 501c4s. It was all over the news how much money was raised. Right. We did not see that on our platform either. And again, I think it has to do a little bit more with, the topics weren't necessarily, or the reason people are giving to the nonprofits is a little bit more, it's less on the, who you're voting for and more about the topics that they care about. And so in that moment, we weren't really seeing much happening there, like other platforms were.
Interesting. Otis, any thoughts about why that might be?
Well, I think that there was on the right at the first debate with Biden, there was very little rage in terms of clearly their guy won, and so there wasn't that emotion that was activated. So,
And then the Harris thing, also no rage.
Correct, yeah.
So what we're saying is rage beats neutral, rage beats winning or feeling victorious. Rage beats, for us at least in 501c3s, rage beats happiness and joy.
Yes, there's an old old saying in politics. If you're if the electorate's focused on the other guy, then you're winning, and that's because you're making your people mad. So you want to keep the focus off you. And then, again, that's kind of counterintuitive because you also hear that, oh gosh, the candidate with the most hopeful message will win. But really it's when you keep the focus on your opponent that you're winning. So if you make your opponent the issue, it makes people angry and exposes them as the opposite of what your folks believe, and that's what drives them to donate money, go out and vote, drive their kids to the polls, and so on and so forth.
Mhm. So if rage is present, we 501c3s are going to do well. If it's not present, we're going to remain neutral. Fascinating.
Well, and if I can just say one more thing about that, that's what makes the nonprofit world a little bit challenging. It's hard to take your mission and get people enraged.
Mhm.
There really isn't a boogeyman. So
Yeah.
It's much easier to raise money when people are against someone than when they're just for a better future, so to speak.
I had a couple of questions from our community. I told them we were doing this session and they submitted questions for us, which was really helpful. Iman wants to know, how are folks navigating their mobile outreach in this text-heavy election season? Do you have any insight on that?
The text to donate is still going to be a relevant strategy. You might compete with more text messages, spam text messages asking you which political campaign you're going to be affiliated with. But if this donor is already in your existing donor base, there is no reason why you shouldn't continue to communicate. And if texting is the way you communicate, then continue to do it. It kind of goes back to the broader strategy of what we continue to tell the nonprofits: communicate. Don't shy away from communication right now. It's important. These people want to hear from you. In some spaces, they feel like they have to hear from you because they're getting so much other type of, maybe they would classify as toxic information with so much going on in the political landscape. So don't stop talking. And if the way you are communicating is via text, continue that. I wouldn't shy away from that.
Okay. Sean Supers of Zero Prostate Cancer had a really interesting question. She wants to know, is there a difference in how the election season might impact donors versus volunteer fundraisers? Might they be less likely to ask?
In election year, we don't see peer-to-peer fundraising drop. And so the organizations who are continuing to do that type of campaign, I think are not necessarily coming up against, will my fundraiser not fundraise on my behalf? What I do think is interesting is you actually might see a spike in some of these things. So, for example, if you are on the receiving end of a heated political conversation that might be on reproductive rights or, something that's pretty polarizing, people will want to act. In the same way you see volunteers signups happen, you probably will see something similar with these types of peer-to-peer fundraisers. And they have no problem asking. And so I would highly encourage actually this type of fundraising. Those people are passionate, and the people they probably surround themselves with are also passionate. And so, I think peer-to-peer fundraising during an election year can actually really help in a lot of ways because they're the ones telling your story, and people like to give to people. And so I don't see that type of fundraising. Historically, we don't see that type of fundraising dip. And actually in certain circumstances, it actually increases. And again, it goes back to that heart of the fundraiser, who's executing on your behalf.
So basically we're sort of saying, just keep doing what you're doing. There is no blackout period. There is no change completely unless budget makes you change on ad spend.
That as well as October. So just be mindful of what happens in October because there is so much noise in October.
Yeah.
So, I was just talking with a nonprofit. Their annual gala happens in October. They're nervous around what is going to happen. Will they have the same type of response? Will people still be participating in the auction? We don't anticipate numbers to drop there. But I don't know if I would bump your gala right up against the actual election. Happening after the election, absolutely. I think that's totally fine. But October is going to be noisy. So ad spend, those sorts of things, just be really mindful of what you're up against. If you can push a campaign to launch late September, you might have better results of whether it be fundraising or other donor engagement, just any sort of engagement could be better in September versus October. Doesn't mean you should stop talking. Even though the noise exists, don't stop talking. Your people, your donors, your supporters, they want to hear from you. And so don't stop. Just be mindful of what you kind of would be up against in the month of October.
Got it. Otis, let's assume it's now, and I'm preparing for two eventualities, either a candidate who is fully aligned with my nonprofit mission gets elected, or the candidate who is completely out of alignment with my nonprofit mission gets elected. Should I prepare two sets of messaging post-election?
Well, I think it's most important in that situation to prepare stuff if the person who is out of line with your mission gets elected. Because, then you've got to say to your community, hey, we couldn't rely on the voters to make our mission happen. So we've got to go, it's our community that's got to make it happen. And so, it's kind of counterintuitive, but I think it's if the opposition to your mission comes into power, that I think that you've really got to be prepared to message your people even more aggressively.
Yeah, that
Gotcha.
rapid response strategy is so important. And making sure you have that in prep for what will happen
Yes.
is so critical. Because, people will want to, I think on both sides, honestly, will want to support in the way that they can. But the key to a response strategy is making sure that you're doing all the prep up front, because the last thing you want is, oh my gosh, this thing blew up. Okay, we're not prepared. We got to run campaigns now. Okay, what's the messaging? Do we need sign off from a board? Okay, what about legal? All of those sorts of things. So as much as you can do, and honestly, a rapid response strategy is good for any time of the year, because you simply don't, it's a rapid response for a reason. You don't anticipate that. And so, I think that people are willing and wanting to get involved, but making sure that you are focused on that rapid response strategy and prepped for it ahead of time is critical. One nonprofit I spoke to did this in prep for the debate that happened. And so, they didn't know how the debate was. No one really knew how that debate was going to go. And so, not knowing, okay, what topics were going to be shared or what was going to happen, they had this campaign in place. They didn't need to use it, but they still have it. Now, for anything else that happens, they've got, okay, here's our messaging. This is what we're going to do on social. This is what we're doing on email. Everything's been approved. This is what the campaign looks like. And it can go up and get out really quick.
Love it. Otis, thinking about having that rapid response ready, using the ideas that we've talked about, what is the psychological path from I'm a first-time donor and I am enraged to, I really like this nonprofit. I love the mission. I want to continue. What happens to me? Is it the 7 stages of grief or something like that? What is it?
Well, no, it's not that different than, than a good traditional donor journey, that we hear about, talk about so often. How are you bringing that person into the organization? I don't know if it's a well-known fact or not, but most major donors start off as small dollar donors. And someone doesn't just show up and write a $10,000 check. It happens every now and then. There's a black swan, but more often somebody writes a check for $50, $100, and whatever, and then they see how how that's received. They learn more about how the nonprofit communicates with them in terms of fulfilling their mission and so forth. As a psychologist, most important I think is they decide if this organization is a good fit for me. Is this me? Is this part of my identity? Someone who's a champion for whatever it is. And if that's the case, then they can move on and over time be persuaded to be a major donor. But very few people start out as major donors. And I think of it the same way with these people who are the rage donors. We bring them along in the same way. Now we have a shorter time period to do that in because this emotional state, as I said earlier, is only going to last for a few days to a few weeks, depending on the person. So we've got to, as Shana said, you've really got to be prepared to engage these people in the best way possible, and go ahead and do it very quickly.
So we are saying catch a wave. Yeah.
Sure,
It's an
absolutely,
emotional wave. Yes.
absolutely.
Okay. All right, I like that. Do you think that we need to pay big attention to particular dates?
So we talked a little bit about October, just because we know that because of we say October because we know what happens from ad spend in October from political campaigns. It spikes pretty aggressively in October. The week of the campaign is also probably the time that at the beginning of the week people are pretty sensitive, and at the end of the week they're pretty sensitive, depending on how things go and how things work themselves out. But then pretty quickly we start to see things kind of go back to normal. So I would say, in addition to, the two dates or one date at this point that you had mentioned, as well as October, if there is a debate, that's also a time. You don't want to launch a campaign in the middle of a debate. You're really going to have a hard time getting eyes on that. If you do decide to launch, I think your communication plan is really important, and continued communication plan of those launches in general, but especially during this time. But outside of the few dates that you had mentioned, October and then obviously election week, those are the ones that we would say let's be mindful of those.
All right. I think we have covered all of our major topics. I want to ask you guys at the end, what's your top three? If you can only tell me three things in an elevator, what are you going to tell me?
One is data shows us that you don't have to get so finicky about this time of year. So that's one. Continue with your strategy is kind of the add-on to that. The second thing is look at your data. If you have not already looked at your data as to understand, okay, what happened 4 years ago, or, honestly, if you can go back as 8 and plus years to actually see how your donors reacted during these election times, that's going to give you more information about your nonprofit than kind of the global information that we're giving today. So the data is really important. And then the third thing I would say is, the communication strategy. Don't stop communicating. People really still want to continue to hear from you. And if I can add a bonus one.
Okay, bonus number 4.
It's just ensuring that you have a strategy for those, those times where rage giving might actually happen, or a rapid response strategy. Just being in an election year as prepared as possible, I think, is key in order to capture new donors or to grow donors. I think it's 29% we found that donors will convert from one time to recurring in the first 90 days. So communication during that time, I think, is really important, even if you're competing with a lot of noise.
Got it. All right, Otis, your top 3 stuck in an elevator. 7 floors.
I would say it's even more important now to acknowledge and appreciate donors quickly, in a timely fashion. I think just good practice, communicate the impact that they're having. Hugely important, but often sadly overlooked by nonprofits. And then focus on the community, because when the political season's over, the community is going to be sustained. Your community is going to be sustained, and you want them to be part of it.
Love it. All right, my top 3 is this. First, tell your CEO it's going to be it's going to be terrible. Run around like everything is terrible. And then you're going to catch a wave. You're going to raise a bunch of money. You're going to look heroic. And in the midst of doing that, you're going to bring a lot of people into your organization and give them joy and community. And then you're going to get a promotion. That's what we're doing this season. All right. So Shanna Birky, thank you so much. VP of Customer Experience at Classy, Otis Fulton, VP of Psychological Strategy at Turnkey. I thank you. My name is Katrina VanHuss. I'm the founder of Turnkey, and I'm happy that you let us in your ear today. Thank you. Bye-bye.